From Troy Public Radio, this is In Focus, and I'm Carolyn Hutcheson. Ann Kenda, our morning edition host, introduces her new podcast, Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White. And it's an Alabama story she covered for NPR in 2022. As Ann delved into the circumstances surrounding an escaped inmate and the corrections officer transporting him, she shares the backstory in her 5-episode podcast in its debut this week. Ann Kenda, thank you so much for joining us for In Focus today.
So thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to this.
And you are Troy Public Radio's morning edition host and host of a brand new podcast that is debuting this week. It's called Inside Job. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
I was listening to the debut episode, and it is exciting and it is excellent. Tell me how Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White, came about.
Well, we were intrigued by the idea of doing a true crime podcast, and this story in particular really spoke to me. There are so many different interesting angles to it, and I really wanted an opportunity to do a deep dive into this story.
And you actually covered this story for NPR.
I did. When it was taking place in the spring of 2022, I got a chance to report for NPR and keep everyone updated on the situation as it was unfolding. It took place over 11 days, actually.
Is there anything in your background that led to your interest in true crime?
Well, my uncle is well known in the true crime world. He's Joe Kenda on the American Detective Show. I know you know him, Carolyn, because you've seen his show and you've spoken to him for In Focus. So that was my entrance into the true crime world. And then from there, I kept discovering other things I was interested in. And true crime is really taking off as a genre. And I've been able to watch and listen, and now a chance to do my own podcast.
Remind the listeners what happened back in 2022 that you covered for NPR.
Well, a guard and inmate were missing from the Lauderdale County Detention Facility, and a blue alert went out across the state. And a lot of people remember that because it's so rare. You don't usually ever get a blue alert. So people thought it was a mistake, and then it turned out it was not a mistake. A guard was actually missing. And then we started finding out about her. Of course, there was a chance that she could have been taken against her will. She could have been manipulated. They were also looking into the possibility that she developed a relationship with the inmate. The two went off. They actually went to Evansville, Indiana, not a place that they had any known connection to, but they needed just a place to hide, and it ended up being Evansville, Indiana, and that's where they were caught 11 days later.
She was a long-time corrections officer, very trusted. You delved into her background. What did you find out?
Well, one thing we were looking at when we were looking at Vicky White's life that kind of stood out to me, her ex-husband had died in January. The escape took place in April. And we were talking a little bit about how people who are grieving do strange things sometimes. It's part of the grieving process. And the timing really stood out to me. And it was her ex-husband. And I think sometimes people minimize grief. They say, well, it's your ex-husband. You shouldn't be as grief-stricken as you are. And I think to have people minimize it, I think it affected her and it was not necessarily understood. I think it played a role in this escape.
Vicky White was in her mid-50s, and the other person in this story, Casey White, a criminal with a violent record. How did he manipulate her, do you think?
It could be something where only the two people involved know the answer to that. We have been looking at the subject of inmate manipulation and how it can be avoided. And in fact, we have a very interesting interview on that in the podcast. And we've been discussing the role of the corrections officer in society because it's a job that's misunderstood. When you look at movies and TV shows, the guard is never like a good character. They're always getting bribed or something's going wrong with that. So we kind of take a look at the job itself and say, how can we help guards with their mental and physical health?
And you alluded to a person. In the podcast, you tell us her name, Chantel Petty. How did you find her?
Through social media, I contacted her, and she was detained briefly as a teenager in Lauderdale County, and Vicky White happened to be her jailer, and she talks about the experience and what it was like.
So let's listen to a clip of Chantel Petty talking about this incident.
It was my first time ever, and she came down to the plexiglass, to the big glass window, and she'll open up the pan hole where they slide in the dinner trays. And she was like, "Hey, don't cry. It's gonna be okay. You'll be out soon. Just make sure when you get out, you don't come back." Like I said, she was very helpful. She would literally go the extra mile.
And we just listened to Chantel Petty. And again, how did you find her?
That was through social media because I really wanted to speak to someone who was on that side of the bars when meeting Vicky.
There was an interesting clip in your Inside Job podcast that referred to body language. I would never have thought about body language playing a part in this story. What was that about?
That was when Vicky and Casey were leaving the jail. She was walking in front of him. When they pulled the security video to see what was going on, it really caught the attention of people who know that that's not the protocol for guards to be walking in front of inmates. You would always walk behind them, and ideally, you would have another guard with you. So it was unusual that she was taking him somewhere by herself, which wouldn't be the protocol, and she was walking in front of him.
The ironic thing in your podcast, Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White, she was about to retire, of all things, when this happened. So you delve into that part of the story, and I'm wondering, how can your listeners get this podcast, and how many episodes are there?
There are 5 episodes being released every day this week. We know people like to binge true crime, so we're making that very easy and putting out all the episodes, 1 per day this week. So you can find that anywhere you get your podcasts at. You just search Inside Job Understanding Vicky White.
We know in the news what happened to her. She lost her life. But what happened to him?
Casey White is in his early 40s now, and he is back in custody, and they say it's for life this time.
And you have delved into the story of Vicky White and Casey White, and it's a story full of mystery and tragedy. But I'm so glad that you have brought the full story to your listeners through the podcast Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White. Is there anything you want your listeners to know about this?
I just think if you are intrigued by Vicky White's story, if you want to learn more, if you want to learn about some of the red flags to help prevent this sort of thing in the future, then this podcast is really for you.
And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Carolyn. I really enjoyed this.
That was Ann Kenda, Troy Public Radio's Morning Edition host, introducing her new true crime podcast, Inside Job, Understanding Vicky White. The 5-episode podcast is produced by Austin Toy with editor Kyle Gassett and is available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us today for In Focus. I'm Carolyn Hutcheson, and this is listener-supported Troy Public Radio.